Edward October.
I'm Jaylan Salah.
The sound you hear is an excerpt from Scheherazade, Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov's symphonic suite based upon the 1001 Nights. And this is the start of Octoberpod. This episode is going to be, in great part, dedicated to a mythological and paranormal creature that is largely absent from the fantastic literature of the West, but which is integral to the folklore, spiritual and cultural identity, and horror literature of Arabic and Islamic cultures. The Jinn. This morning's special guest, writer, YouTuber, and podcaster Jaylan Salah, knows a thing or two about this subject, and has agreed to enlighten us. Before we get started, Jaylan, could you tell us what a jinn is and how they differ from the genies that we're familiar with from Western pop culture? I assume they're nothing like Aladdin's blue-skinned Robin Williams character or I Dream of Jeannie.
No. These are really funny, lovely, kind of cheeky versions or renditions of jinns. Okay, in Islamic belief, the jinn is a creature, that God created from a smokeless, scorching fire before the creation of humankind. They share space with humans, remain largely unseen. They inhabit the earth, and they have the ability to conceal themselves, assume different forms. They appear as humans, sometimes as the dead, a lot of times as animals such as serpents, black cats, and black dogs, which is why we kind of try to avoid black cats and black dogs in dark alleys especially, but we love black cats and black dogs. We don't believe, that they have anything bad. But this is the way we are told that jinns take the form of those animals. However, some jinns are good, some are bad, some are evil, some worship God, some don't, some are Muslims, some are not. But there are believers, there are non-believers. Of course, they have intellect and they have free will. So what makes a very, very darker aspect of jinns is that some of them are downright malevolent. Those are the demons. The malevolent ones are the demons. They are the most defiant and malevolent, branch of the jinns. Kind of like the psychopaths in humans. So they have the power to hide and shapeshift and blah blah blah. They exist invisibly around us, supposedly, in ways that we can't notice and we shouldn't notice. Their world is like a mirror world to ours, one that humans shouldn't break the barrier between us, and or else terrible consequences should happen, because you could always find, as you grow up, all these books and all these stories about enslaving jinns and communicating with the jinns and breaking the barrier, but we are always taught that this is not good and it will always lead to shitty things. It's kind of like when you talk about, the otherness or astral projection and the difference between the spirit world and the material world and all that crap. People who practice black magic, of course, enslave demons, which are the evil jinns, to their gain. When you read the 1001 Nights, they show up a lot in it. So they just occupy a substantial place in our theology and cultural imagination. And if you read 1001 Nights, you will find many stories where the jinn interact with the humans and cause kind of a stir. And yes, we had Prophet Solomon, who enslaved some of the jinns and imprisoned them in lamps. So yeah, when they appear, it's usually not as friendly and cutesy and blue as, Genie in Aladdin, but they appear very evil. But in the lore, they say that they grant you 3 wishes. You could read that also in 1001 Nights, the amazing Arabic book. Yeah, the actual jinns are nothing like the lore at all. And they're not friendly and cutesy at all. So I didn't learn about the jinns. Yes, I read, of course, 1001 Nights, but also I know all about them from a religious perspective. Of course, this is the thing. This is related to the story. People who try to summon spirits through seances, Ouija boards, similar rituals are breaking the barrier between our world and the jinn world. And of course, the ones they will meet are not the good believer jinns. They will meet the demons, the malevolent jinns. And this will be terrible with terrible consequences, of course. So, yeah, this is bad. This is real shit.
Jaylan will be back during the intermission to chat with us more about jinns and a few other horror and horror-adjacent topics. But for now, let's delve into the dark recesses of Reddit and read about some allegedly true jinn encounters. Most of these experiences are recounted from threads in the r/Islam and r/Muslim Lounge subreddits, and I will credit the usernames for each post as we go along. We may have made some modifications to the text of these stories to make them more concise and readable. Otherwise, the tales are told in their own words, as the saying goes. Our first jinn encounter was submitted by Reddit user Femboy17. So, it's what happened to me last winter. I normally stay at my grandpa's place most of the time, and it's just me, 3 aunts, and my grandparents. My cousins come there occasionally too. Where they live is pretty green, like loads of trees, lots of nature, etc. There's a really cool park just 10 minutes of walking distance away from the place, and I usually went there at night because you can see very rare birds and baby birds and stuff like that at night. So long story short, one day, me and a friend, who's my neighbor here, we decided to walk and explore the place at night and take the long way to the park because we deliberately wanted something paranormal to happen. We were walking on the sidewalk alongside the main roads at night. It was about 1 a.m., and there was a bit of fog as well, due to the early winters. He repeated something to me he'd seen posted on a meme, which said not to walk under trees because it might anchor a jinn. But me being dumb AF thought it was just one of those made-up myths aunties tell you to stop playing. So I kept walking under trees throughout the way. I had watched this YouTube video the same week where they taught you about all the types of jinns that existed, and those of you who don't know this, they have specific names and types. We reached this pretty old tree that was dead and dry in the middle of nowhere. I don't know why I did this, but I joked with my friend saying a particular jinn lives here, and I spoke the name of that jinn. And then I went forward and said out loud to the jinn, calling him by name, "You live here, right?" And I kid you not, the exact same moment I said this, the most horrific growl came from above the tree, right over our heads. That growl is still etched in my ears. It was just like an angry grizzly bear's, to give you an example. And it was so loud that my ears got blocked and started to ring. We started to run instantly, started reciting prayers, and just kept running as fast as we could till we reached my friend's house. It felt like a movie, and it was hard to fathom what just happened. And that's not all. We ended up going to this place since it was closer than my grandpa's by a few houses, and only his mom was home, so nobody was awake. As soon as we entered the house, we entered it through a back door, as we sort of sneaked out, as we weren't allowed to go out this late at all. The house had 2 floors. His mom was asleep on the upper floor. We entered, and only a few small yellowish lights were on in the dining room, and everything else was pitch black. The moment we entered and slowly walked to his room that was on the right side, we heard heavy breathing coming out of the room that was on the left, about 10 feet away, as if someone huge was breathing really loud. So we sprinted to his room and locked it. Then what happened next was that the entire night we felt like someone was calling my name from the outside. And I heard someone calling my name from the outside, and there was no one else in the house at all except for my friend's mom, who was sleeping. And if it was her, she would have just opened the door herself. We really heard someone moving things outside the room and walking when there was nobody there. In the morning, I went over to my own place, and my friend told me that when he slept, he woke up feeling like there was someone sitting on his chest and he couldn't breathe. He said that it was only until he managed to painfully recite some prayers that the thing or feeling went away. Thankfully, it did not happen to me, probably because I recite many prayers normally before going to sleep every night. So, do not challenge jinns because they are as real as the day, and this is not my only experience. According to something my uncle told me, that place was probably built upon old pagan graveyards. I hope he's joking, to be honest. This one comes from Reddit user Optrip. My mom told me the story, so basically in 2002 she was living in Pakistan as she got married to my father in 2000. My dad worked in a different city 5 hours away at this time and would only visit on the weekends. They rented a house in 2002 right after my brother was born in March of '02. This house was huge, however it was quite cheap. They met with the landlord. Turns out it was this young woman who was renting them the house, and she told them that her mother would live in the master bedroom on the ground floor, which had a bathroom connected to it with a separate entrance, so it was completely separate from everything else. The door connected to the room in the lounge room and would be bolted shut. My parents agreed to this. However, the mother of the woman, let's call her Fatima, did not want to rent the house as she had been living there all her life and wanted the whole house to herself, but the daughter rented it anyways. Fatima was old, late 60s, 70s. She had long nails that were dark and blackened and deformed. She was very short and had a hunchback. Her hair was short and uneven, dyed different colors but mostly gray, would wear heavy makeup that was probably not suitable for her old age. In general, she had a bit of a terrifying appearance. In my mom's words, she looked like a witch, and my mother was terrified of this woman. She also seemed like an actual witch, as in a witchcraft doer, and had terrible hygiene. Basically, my mom worked as a lecturer at this time and would come home at around 5 p.m., so they hired a maid that lived with them. It's Pakistan, so that's very common. During the day, my brother and the maid, let's call her Bushra, would sit in the lounge and blast music and sing songs. The old woman used to sleep in the morning and wake up during the night, so she would yell at the maid through the door, and this would happen for weeks. Bushra was 18 to 20, so she would engage in childish banter with her and found it funny and would blast music more and sing louder. Fatima hated them and wanted my mother and the maid to leave the house, as she never wanted it to be rented in the first place. Bushra and Fatima had a few arguments through the door, but my mother would never intervene or talk to Fatima, as she was scared. In the kitchen, right above the sink, was a window, and it basically was the window to the garage, so every time the woman would leave her room, she would be seen in the garage, as the exit door was right there in the garage. One time at 2 a.m., Bushra was doing the dishes, singing songs, and then Fatima screamed. The maid looked up and saw Fatima right in front of her face on the other side of the window in the pitch black, no lights on in the garage, staring at her. Bushra got scared and ran away. The old woman would always stand near that window and wait for my mom to enter the kitchen so she could talk to her. But they basically ended up putting a curtain on that window so the woman would leave them alone. The woman hated them, wanted them to leave, and it was very weird. But here's the jinn part. My mother already got bad vibes from the house, but one day at around 10 or 11 p.m., late at night, she was relaxing on the bed, but not asleep, with my brother on the cot about 6 feet away from the bed. She had a chat with Bushra, and as soon as Bushra left the room, a presence entered. It felt as though something negative had entered the room, and the light was on. However, the room became dull. She saw a smoke-black figure near the door, and then very quickly it entered my brother's cot in a matter of seconds. She walked to the cot and looked in, and what she saw was nothing like my baby brother. His face had completely changed. His nails literally grew and became black. His limbs were twisted and weird, and he had his hands in like a claw. And as my mom looked at him, he kind of scowled at her and kind of almost slowly tried to reach her with his claws. She stumbled back and started reciting some bits of the Quran automatically. It's just what rolled off her tongue. My brother then collapsed, and she felt the thing leave. He turned purple red and had a burning hot fever. She called some neighbor to go to the hospital because she didn't have a car. It was raining really hard at this time, which makes it even scarier. LOL. She ran out to the garage, and the old woman was just standing there in the rain in the pitch-black garage, smiling. She asked my mom, "Is everything okay?" My mother was surprised. She knew something wrong was going on. She didn't bother to answer and ran back. She asked the maid if she had told Fatima about the incidents, and Bushra said no. But yeah, my mother had many encounters with jinns after all that, because of the black magic. That woman wanted them to leave the house badly, so maybe she might have done it. Now, this poster later down in the thread clarifies, although I understand the old woman not wanting us there, I don't think it's a valid reason to do black magic on someone. But then again, to me, there's no valid reason. Her daughter and her 3 sons, who were all in their 30s and had their own lives, apparently argued a lot over what to do with the house and who will check up on the old woman and support her financially, because none of her kids liked her for some reason. So her daughter had the idea to rent it like that and then split the money with the old woman so she could support herself. But the woman didn't like this idea at all and told my parents that her kids did this without really including her in the decision-making. So, although I feel bad for her because of all that, there also must be a reason why they were all so fed up with her. Another deleted user had this story to share. When I was young, I used to dream about an old woman who was dressed modestly and a deformed child sprouting out of her shoulders like the old woman was a tree and the child was a branch. She always used to wander outside the walls of our home, and sometimes she used to just stand by our door. I had this dream 4 to 6 times, I believe. I had these dreams before a maid, who was working for our neighbor, got possessed one night. It was almost midnight. She was screaming and crying out loud. I quickly go to where she was screaming, and there were men and women reading Quran over her. Then I was told to leave and just go back to sleep. That was my first encounter with someone who was possessed. I genuinely wasn't scared. I don't know why. According to various Hat 7678, this happened when I used to live in Pakistan in the 90s. I was exactly 5 years old, lying next to my cousin. We were watching Captain Planet cartoons. It was around 3 or 4 a.m. Our families were having breakfast because we were all going to Islamabad to pick up our U.S. visas and documents. The TV suddenly shut off, but the lights were still on. Moments later, a tree trunk-like figure began to rise up from behind the TV. Its face was the size of a 20-inch pizza pan, and the figure kept stretching upwards until its head touched the ceiling, which was no less than 10 or 12 feet high. It had no visible arms or legs, just a long black body and a big face with hollow eyes and an overly large mouth filling up the face and a huge nose. And then it vanished. My cousin then told my parents, and they confirmed with me that we had seen a jinn. Another time when I was around 8, and it was my first visit back home, we were at my cousin's house in the village, and we were playing hide and seek. They had a storeroom where 6 of us hid, while the 7th was seeking us. In that room, we saw a figure hidden beneath a blanket approaching us. It looked just like someone using a sheet to dress up as a ghost. I thought it was one of my cousins trying to scare us. But then there was a gust of air or something, and the blanket just floated to the ground. There had been no one underneath it. Siege Player 7 shared 2 separate encounters. 1. When I was a kid, I used to sleep in the same room with my younger brother and sister. But on this night, my brother was sleeping in my parents' room. So it was just me and my sister. Light was off. I was reading a book by the light of a flashlight with the blanket over my head. Then I heard a voice, can't tell if it was male or female, telling me in perfectly accented Arabic to switch off the light. I can understand Arabic, but speaking fluently is a problem. My sister can't speak it at all, let alone do the accent. So I was already scared regarding what the hell just happened. I called out to my sister and switched on the light, but she was fast asleep. I just went under my blanket, scared, and started praying. I was spooked for a few days till I eventually forgot about it. 2. The second incident happened about a year ago. My door was closed and I heard my knock on the door. As in, all members of our family have their own knock, so we could quickly hide stuff my dad wouldn't like to see us doing. Snacks, Pepsi, chess, etc. Now, Pepsi I guess I can understand, but why would his dad disapprove of chess? So I heard someone do my knock on the door, which no one ever does. Never. I was puzzled. I said, "Enter." 10 seconds went by. No one came in. I opened the door. No one was there. Only people in the house at the time were me, my brother, and my mom. My brother's room is right above mine. And it couldn't have been my brother because I would have heard him leave the room, come down, run up the stairs, and then hurry back into his own room again, within those 10 seconds. I would have heard his door opening and all the thuds like you would hear an elephant walking past you. My mom was sleeping for certain, and I could tell from her face she wasn't faking it. I think we've got time for one more. This one comes from Helpful Trade 108. I remember when I was little, around 5-ish or younger, I used to live in the village. We had a big house, but there was a lot of farmland around and a pond. I got a lot of bad dreams, which usually ended up with me screaming or waking up. I used to sleep in my mom's bed. It happened every night. I used to see very strange and scary things. I still remember some of them now. Anyways, my mother took me to an imam, and they gave me a necklace with some Quran written on a paper attached to it. She would force me to wear it. I'm not sure why I didn't. Later on, I got a dream, and the first thing I did when I woke up was run to open the bedroom door, which led directly to the living room. My mom, of course, ran right behind me, and we saw a dark figure of a man, I think, sitting on our chair. She recited some Quran before turning the lights on, but there was nothing. Of course, this could just be a hallucination, but we both saw it. There's another jinn story, but this time it's at my Nana's house. The house was located in a really old area. Apparently there was a lakish swamp, and it was really old. My grandpa bought the land because it was cheap, since no one wanted it due to all the superstitions. Anyway, they built a nice 3-story house, but some of the wood they used to build it came from trees from the area around the swamp. My mom has 7 siblings. They all sleep in the 2nd story, and the 3rd has a balcony. At night, they usually light a candle in their room because it's better than to sleep in the dark. One night, one of the brothers was sleeping in his room, but then he felt strangled. He couldn't move and was struggling to breathe. It felt like he was physically fighting someone, but managed to scream out a few times. His siblings woke up and came in. They found him resisting an unseen force, which was probably the jinn, and he was so worn out from the fight, the jinn had slammed him against the wall or something like that. And when my Nana came in, they started reciting Quran while they tried to hold him down and wake him up. Once they finally did, they saw bruises on his wrists. They lit the candle and told him to go back to sleep. But not long after, my mom's middle sister also started screaming. She was being attacked and strangled by it too. She was awake though. They got her free and recited prayers and hushed her to sleep. This time, one of them stayed in the room just in case. And yes, the jinn did go into someone else's room again. Of course, the cliche of the candles going out on their own That happened, but the thing was, this time my uncle, a different uncle, was supposedly awake, and he was fighting it like he was seeing it. When everyone came in, due to the noises and commotion, it left. Then they did all the candles and stuff. Thank God it didn't happen again that night. They later got an imam into the house to do a cleansing ritual, so the jinn visits stopped. I don't think they stopped entirely because things still happened, but it wasn't as bad. It's intermission time, folks. While you step away from the keyboard to grab a bag of freshly popped hot buttered popcorn, a sparkling soft drink, or a taste-tempting hot dog with all the fixins, I'm going to chat a bit with our guest, Jaylan Salah. Could you tell the folks out there in listener land a few of your credits?
Okay, film critic, feminist, or, whatever that means nowadays. Podcaster, wild woman, translator, author, poet. I run the J-Days YouTube channel, and I write for Geek Vibes Nation, Twin Geeks, and In Session Film. I'm also frequently present on the Women in Session Film podcast, but also I'm a frequent podcaster on an assortment of other podcasts.
Tell me about some of your favorite horror movies and horror literature. Why do they resonate with you?
When I was little, I was obsessed with choose your own nightmare stories. I just loved, especially when I was a kid, stories where you could choose your destiny, where, like each choice and each page led to a different choice, led to a different path for the character, especially choose your own nightmare, because many of those stories, it led to sad ending, and you would read that you died, or that the vampire bit you, or that the monster ate you, or something like that, or you met your demise. So this was very fascinating to do within a controlled environment, like a choose your own nightmare story.
One of my favorite choose your own adventure books was called Space Vampire, but I'd always choose the path that got me killed. So what I'd do is I'd reverse engineer all the decisions you'd have to make to arrive at one of the happy endings.
So I love that so much. I also read the entire Goosebumps and Fear Street books, scary stories to tell in the dark. Of course, like the casual Stephen King and H.P. Lovecraft, all kinds of the usual, all the greats. But mainly, if you ask me about my favorite horror stories, it's usually things where I get to be a little bit in control, or I get to control the medium. So yeah, choose your own nightmare were my favorite series of all time. Favorite horror series. As for films, I just love horror movies. But there was a stage in my life where I was obsessed with every rendition of Dracula possible, whether in fiction, literature, or movies. And I loved vampire movies for a particular time in my life. A particular time I liked zombie movies. Another time I liked werewolf movies. I don't think it had like a specific stagnant phase or a stagnant, subgenre of the horror that I was interested in. It usually changed from time to time and from mood to mood, because I'm easily bored and I'm very volatile in terms of my taste and stuff. I think I'm more into gothic horror, or horror that is masquerading as something else, but I also like gore and creepy things.
What, in your estimation, are the elements of a great horror story?
That's a great question. I think what makes a horror story great is not the uniqueness of the idea. I don't believe that every horror story must have a revolutionary idea or plot, but no. What matters the most in a great horror story is the perfect description of imagery, the maintenance of tone and language, and the overall atmosphere. Every element has to be perfect in place. I think the overall mood and tension are more important than the originality of the story. I don't believe that a good horror story has to be original at all. I can read a gazillion vampire stories and feel aroused and horrified, but read an innovative idea that leaves me snoring after a few pages. I could give you an example. There is a great short story by Stephen King called Library Policeman in his short story collection, 4 Past Midnight. This is a horrifying story, and it's not really one of his greatest works, and it's not like he didn't come with an idea out of the box. It's an allegory for also childhood abuse or childhood sexual abuse, and it's very dark and disturbing. It terrifies me. It really terrifies me. And he has done a lot of stories that were about allegories of, like past child abuse that resurfaced or suppressed memories of abuse in childhood. And this one, he nails it perfectly. And I think it's one of the best things that he's ever written.
You mentioned in your interview with Jeremy Bryant about Frankenstein how much you love video nasties. Now, I know what video nasties are, but for listeners who may not know, could you tell us what they are and what do you like most about them?
Okay, so video nasty is a colloquial term popularized by the National Viewers and Listeners Association in the United Kingdom to refer to a number of films, typically low-budget horror or exploitation films, distributed on videocassette in the early 1980s that were criticized by the press, social commentators, and various religious organizations for their violent content. And when we used to have videotapes to watch those films, that was the era of video nasty back in the 90s when I was a kid, basically. So yeah, I still use that term, and I heard it from one of my friends. One of my friends, we had like a sleepover tea party at my house where I invited my classmates and of course my close friends who were classmates, and one of them brought the CD for the Evil Dead, Sam Raimi's original Evil Dead, and she told us, we have a video nasty on our hands. This will be our entertainment for tonight. And I remember me and my best friend stuck for hours watching some of the most horrifying things we've ever seen in our lives by then, because I was 14, 13. I was very scared, easily scared as a kid, and although, I existed where the supernatural was something that was kind of like injected into our life, as I would explain later, still, The Evil Dead was unlike anything I've seen before, and it was just a horrifying experience. I remember I couldn't touch that laptop for a week after watching, because I thought, oh my god, if I turned it on, something will jump out of it and grab me.
Oh man, it's always The Evil Dead, isn't it? We didn't have video nasties here in the US because we, for the most part, were making a lot of the movies that got banned. But I remember seeing an interview with Shaun of the Dead director Edgar Wright talking about passing around this well-worn VHS bootleg of The Evil Dead as a kid. Now, that picture wasn't banned here, but it did kind of scar me at a young age. The first time I saw it was peeking through the slats of a stairway railing. My teenage cousin was babysitting me at her house one rainy afternoon in the summer. My cousin's boyfriend had rented The Evil Dead, and they were going to watch it on the couch. I was much too young to watch it. I couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, so they sent me downstairs to play. But I was curious, so I crept up the steps from the basement so that my face was level to the floor in the TV room and, had a good view of the TV. I hid on that step for a good chunk of the movie's first act. Then when we got to the scene where the tree assaults poor Ellen Sandweiss, that was when my cousin and her boyfriend finally noticed me and paused the movie saying, you really shouldn't be watching this. I remember we all met up with the rest of the family for dinner that evening. A Mexican restaurant called El Chico, just a few doors down from the Showbiz Pizza in Johnson City, as I recall. And I was still kind of fucked up from the portion of the movie that I had seen. The audio recording of the incantation and the tree scene both haunted me for a long time after that.
I remember feeling aroused and feeling very excited and euphoric and wanting more. So I started seeking video nasty films, which are basically Dario Argento directed films, rape revenge films, non-exploitation films. And I watched a lot of that crap and I liked it. As long as the violence was unrealistic and was very fun, camp, cheesy, with over-the-top elevated color palette and, very unrealistic environment, I just loved it. So I loved video nasty, whatever I could stomach out of it. I was fine.
As I proved to myself doing my 100 Years of Horror segments, I know a fair amount about horror and the paranormal in the US, UK, and Canada, but my knowledge really fails me as it pertains to other parts of the world, especially outside of Western Europe. What are some of the attitudes regarding the paranormal in Alexandria, Egypt?
People fear the unknown here, there, everywhere. But tales of ghosts and jinn and the macabre are big in our society, especially in the past when the world was quieter and less tech obsessed. It was really about ghost stories and families sitting together and talking about, like past encounters. My grandpa would always talk about walking home from the movie theater after watching, like the original Frankenstein or House of Wax or, anything about mad scientists and stuff. And then the way home, the walk all the way home in the darkness, where it was very like European, like Victorian London, where the lampposts were dimly lit and, it was all about shadows and stuff like that. And it was very, very quiet back then. Now, of course, it's the city that never sleeps. So even at 2, 3, 4 a.m., you can still find noise, especially in major cities. I've been told scary fairy tales and spooky stories by my mother and my 2 late grandmothers and my amazing late grandpa. As I grew up in our paternal grandmother's house, there is a specific story about the ghost of a murdered woman who lives in one of the upper floors. They said that her husband murdered her and committed suicide after he found her cheating on him. They told us that if we listened closely, we would sometimes at night hear his footsteps going up the stairs, like as if he's reenacting the night he murdered her. My sister and I, of course, we got scared easily. We were 2 scaredy chickens, but we also were very adventurous. So every time when the adults were away, we would open the door to the fire, skip stairs, because this is where he was coming up to his apartment to kill her. And we would try to, like eavesdrop, like, hey, can we listen to the ghost's footstep, please? And no, we couldn't. We didn't have an interaction with that ghost, no. Not an encounter. Also, there was a very famous haunted building that was on my way from school to my maternal grandma's house. I passed by it every day because I spent like portions of my childhood and teenagehood at my maternal grandmother's house. And even then, one of my friends who lived by my grandma's house, we would go together for a private tutoring session at, like a few blocks away. Building, and we would again pass by the haunted building, but we never ever even decided like, hey, let's check it out, let's take a look. No. I have my limits and I'm cautious around those things because of, particular appraising, the way I was raised.
There's an Iranian film on Netflix that I highly recommend called Under the Shadow that's about a jinn. Have you seen that one? And are there any other good jinn films you can recommend?
I have not seen it.
Oh, it's so good. You should definitely check it out.
My mom, the biggest horror fan you could ever imagine, watched an American movie called JINN, produced 2021, directed by Justin Powell. I don't think it had any famous actors. It wasn't bad. I'd recommend it as a horror movie, but not a hardcore movie about jinn. It had nothing. It didn't touch on the lore at all. And why is that? Because with all due respect, I haven't seen the Iranian movie, but I think that if you want to make a movie about the jinn, you have to have a Muslim background, because in Islam and in the Arab culture, it has a whole different context and a whole different vibe to it and a whole different history. It's very embedded in the lore and in the collective consciousness. So you need someone with an Islamic background to tell you the story from a very scary, horrifying point of view and to describe a lot of things to you. So I don't know if I'm interested in watching a jinn movie unless it had like, supernatural Islamic elements to it.
At the top of the show, I teased the fact that you or someone you know has encountered a jinn. Okay, so now tell me your jinn story.
Okay, everyone. Lean in a little. This isn't my story. It's one of those stories that gets passed down in families, in low voices, usually late at night, when someone inevitably says, "Don't mess with these things." There was a relative of my grandmother, may she rest in peace, an old man by the time I was born. Actually, he was before my time. And he was known in the family for something very specific. He summoned spirits. Not as a joke, not as a party trick. It was his obsession. He held seances, sat as the medium himself, and people whispered about him, like you'd whisper about someone who lives too close to a graveyard. Most of the time, he thought he knew what he was doing, until one night, He didn't. That night, he didn't just summon a spirit, he summoned a demon, what we'd call one of the powerful, malevolent jinn, one of the shayateen, the truly dangerous ones. And once it came through, he couldn't send it back. From that point on, the jinn followed him everywhere. It haunted him relentlessly, appearing in his home, standing at the foot of the bed while he and his wife slept, letting them wake up just enough to see it, to feel that paralyzing certainty that something was there with them, watching, waiting, not every night, just often enough to break them. He tried everything to banish it. Prayers, rituals, reversal of the same methods he used to summon it in the first place. Nothing worked. And according to the stories we were told growing up, there are rules with these things. A jinn like that doesn't leave without taking something with it. It has to leave a mark, proof of the crossing, a receipt for the boundary broke. Eventually, the jinn did leave, but not before it struck him in the eye. He survived, but he was blinded in that eye for the rest of his life. A permanent mark, a warning stamped on his body, a reminder that some doors, once opened, don't close cleanly. That's why in my family, no one touches Ouija boards, no seances, no just for fun games with the unseen. Because sometimes, something answers back. Ha 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 ha. Okay.
If you were a character in a horror movie, what would your role be?
A blood-sucking temptress or a jinn. Might either be a jinn or a blood-sucking temptress. So yeah, pick your disease.
So, what are you working on now?
What are you working on now? Nothing.
Folks, we've been speaking to Jaylan Salah. Be sure to subscribe to her channel on YouTube and follow her on all the socials.
Thank you very much. This was so much fun.
It's also last call at our modern, convenient concession stand. Last chance to grab a corn dog or an ice-cold chili dilly. Before we move on, I'd like to give a big thanks to Whitney Zahar for her contributions to this segment. Now we have a special treat for you. What follows is a self-contained excerpt from the pulp novel Blood of the Gods by Conan the Barbarian, Red Sonja, and Solomon Kane creator Robert E. Howard. Now, Howard's grasp of the cultures, languages, folklore, and practices of what he would have called the Near East or the Arabic world are as enlightened as you would expect from a Texan pulp writer of the 1930s. In short, don't look to this tale for accurate or sensitive cultural representation. That should not, however, detract from the enjoyment to be derived from this thrilling, two-fisted tale of weird adventure. Buckle up, because Act 2 of Octoberpod starts now. One can see, even at a great distance, that the sheer rock walls, rising like a stony backbone out of a waste of rocky plains, were pitted with caves. There is only one spring in the hills. It flows in a cave high up in the wall and curls down the steep rocky slope, a slender thread of silver, to empty into a broad, shallow pool below. The sun was hanging like a blood-red ball above the western desert when Frank Gordon halted near this pool and scanned the rows of gaping cave mouths with bloodshot eyes. He licked heat-blackened lips with a tongue from which all moisture had been baked, yet there was still a little water in the skin on his shoulder. He had economized on that grueling march with the savage efficiency of the wilderness bred. It seemed a bit hard to realize he had actually reached his goal. The hills had shimmered before him for so many miles, unreal in the heat waves, until at last they had seemed like a mirage, a fantasy of a thirst-maddened imagination. The desert sun plays tricks with a brain like Gordon's. Slowly the hills had grown up before him. Now he stood at the foot of the easternmost cliff. frowning up at the tiers of caves which showed their black mouths in even rows. The Jinn of the Caves, from the novel Blood of the Gods by Robert E. Howard, adapted especially for Octoberpod by John Iger. See show notes for licensing information. Narrated by Edward October. The American dropped on his belly at the pool and sank his face into the cool water. He lifted his head presently, shook it like a lion, shaking his mane, and leisurely washed the dust from his face and hands. Then he rose and went toward a cliff. He lifted his voice and called the name of the man he sought. "Al-Wazir! Oh there! Al-Wazir!" The name of the renowned philosopher, "Wazir," whispered as an echo back from the cliff. The silence was ominous. With his rifle at the ready, Gordon went toward the narrow trail that wound up the rugged face of the cliff. Up this he climbed, keenly scanning the eaves. They pitted the whole wall in even tiers, too even to be the chance work of nature. These were man-made. Thousands of years ago, in the dim dawn of prehistory, they had served as dwelling places for some race of people who were not mere savages, who niched their caverns in the soft strata with skill and cunning. Gordon knew the caves were connected by narrow passages, and that only by this ladder-like path he was following could they be reached from below. The path ended at a long ledge, upon which all the caves of the lower tier opened. In the largest part of these, Al-Wazir had taken up his abode. Gordon called again, without result. He strode into the cave, and there he halted. It was square in shape. In the back wall and in each side wall showed a narrow door-like opening. Those at the sides led into adjoining caves. That at the back led into a smaller cavern, without any other outlet. There, Gordon remembered, Al-Wazir had stored the dried and tinned foods he had brought with him. He had brought no furniture nor weapons. In one corner of the square cave, a heap of charred fragments indicated that a fire had once been built there. In another corner lay a heap of skins, Al-Wazir's bed. Nearby lay the one book Al-Wazir had brought with him, the Bhagavad Gita, but of the man himself there was no evidence. Gordon went into the storeroom, struck a match, and looked about him. The tins of food were there, though the supply was considerably depleted, but they were not stacked against the wall in neat columns, as Gordon had seen them stowed under Al-Wazir's directions. They were tumbled and scattered about all over the floor, with open and empty tins among them. This was not like Al-Wazir, who placed a high value on neatness and order, even in small things. The rope he had brought along to aid him in exploring the caves lay coiled in the corner. Gordon, extremely puzzled, returned to the square cave. Here he had fully expected to find Al-Wazir sitting in tranquil meditation or out on the ledge meditating over the sunset desert. He was certain that Al-Wazir had not wandered away to perish in the desert. There was no reason for him to leave the caves. If he had simply tired of his lonely life and taken his departure, he would have taken the book that was laying on the floor, his inseparable companion. There was no blood stain on the floor, or anything to indicate that the hermit had met a violent end. Nor did Gordon believe that any Arab would disturb this holy man. Anyway, if Arabs or bandits had done away with Al-Wazir, they would have taken away the rope and the tins of food, and he was certain that no outsiders but himself had known of Al-Wazir's whereabouts. He searched through the lower tiers of caves without avail. The sun had sunk out of sight behind the hills, whose long shadows streamed far eastward across the desert, and deepening shadows filled the caverns. The silence and the mystery began to weigh on Gordon's nerves. he began to be irked by the feeling that unseen eyes were watching him. Men who live lives of constant peril develop certain obscure faculties or instincts to a keenness unknown to those lapped about by the securities of civilization. As he passed through the caves, Gordon repeatedly felt an impulse to turn suddenly, to try to surprise those eyes that seemed to be boring into his back. At last, he did wheel suddenly, thumb pressing back the hammer of his rifle, eyes alert for any movement in the growing dusk. The shadowy chambers and passages stood empty before him. Once, as he passed a dark passageway, he could have sworn he heard a soft noise, like the stealthy tread of a bare, furtive foot. He stepped to the mouth of the tunnel and called out. He shivered at the silence which followed. He had not really believed it was Al-Wazir. He groped his way into the tunnel, rifle poked ahead of him. Within a few yards, he encountered a blank wall. There seemed to be no entrance or exit, except the doorway through which he had come, and the tunnel was empty, save for himself. He returned to the ledge before the caves in disgust. Hell, am I getting jumpy? He chided himself. But a grisly thought kept recurring to him, the recollection of the Bedouin's belief that a supernatural fiend lurked in these ancient caves and devoured any human foolish enough to be caught there by night. This thought kept recurring, together with the reflection that the East held many secrets which the West would laugh at, but which often proved to be grim realities. That would explain Al-Wazir's mysterious absence. If some fiendish or bestial dweller in the caves had devoured him, Gordon's speculations revolved about the hypothetical rock python of enormous size, dwelling for generations, perhaps centuries, in the hills. That would explain the lack of any bloodstains. Damn! I must be going batty. It was a fact. There was a brooding weirdness about these ancient and forgotten caverns that roused uncanny speculations in Gordon's mind. What race had occupied them so long ago? What wars had they witnessed? Against what fierce barbarians sweeping up from the south? What cruelties and intrigues had they known? What grim rituals of worship and human sacrifice? Gordon shrugged his shoulders, wishing he had not thought of human sacrifice. The idea fitted too well with the general atmosphere of these grim caverns. Angry at himself, he returned to the big square cavern, known by some as the Eagle's Nest, for some reason or another. He meant to sleep in the caves that night, partly because he did not care to be caught down on the plain in case his pursuers arrived in the night. There was another mystery. The desert was a breeding place of mysteries, a twilight realm of fantasy. Had the fabled jinn of the empty abodes snatched up Al-Wazir and flown away with him, leaving Gordon himself the one man alive in all the vast desert? Such whims of imagination played through his exhausted brain as, too weary to eat, he prepared for the night. He put a large rock in the trail, poised precariously, which anyone climbing the path in the dark would be sure to dislodge. The noise of it would surely awaken him. He stretched himself on a pile of skins, painfully aware of the stress and strains of his long trek, which had taxed even his iron frame to the utmost. He was asleep almost the instant he touched his rude bed. It was because of this weariness of body and mind that he did not hear the velvet-footed approach of the thing that crept upon him in the darkness. He woke only when murderous, taloned fingers clenched on his throat and an inhuman voice whinnied sickening triumph in his ear. Gordon's reflexes had been trained in 1,000 battles, so now he was fighting for his life before he was awake enough to know whether it was an ape or a great serpent that had attacked him. The fierce fingers had almost crushed his throat before he had a chance to tense his neck muscles. Yet those powerful muscles, even though relaxed, had saved his life. Even so, the attack was so stunning, the grasp so nearly fatal, that as they rolled over the floor, Gordon wasted precious seconds trying to tear away the strangling hands by wrenching at the wrists. Then, as his fighting brain asserted itself, even though the red, thickening mists that were enfolding him, he shifted his tactics, drove a savage knee into a hard-muscled belly, and getting his thumbs under the little finger of each crushing hand, bent them fiercely back. No strength can resist that leverage. The unknown attacker let go, and instantly Gordon smashed a trip-hammer blow against the side of his head and rolled clear as the hard frame went momentarily limp. It was as dark in the cave as the gullet of hell, so dark Gordon could not even see his antagonist. He sprang to his feet, drawing his scimitar. He stood poised, tense, wondering uncomfortably if the thing could see in the dark, and scarcely breathing as he strained his ears. At the first faint sound, he sprang like a panther and slashed murderously at the noise. The blade cut only empty air. There was an incoherent cry, a shuffle of feet, then the rapidly receding pad of hurried footsteps. Whatever it was in retreat. Gordon tried to follow it, ran into a blank wall, and by the time he had located the side door through which, apparently, the creature had left, the sounds had faded out. The American struck a match and glared around, not expecting to see anything that would give him a clue to the mystery. Nor did he. The rock floor of the cavern showed no footprint. What manner of creature he had fought in the dark he did not know. Its body had not seemed hairy enough for an ape, though the head had been a tangled mass of hair. Yet it had not fought like a human being. He had felt its talons and teeth, and it was hard to believe that human muscles could have contained such iron strength as he had encountered. And the noises it had made had certainly not resembled the sounds a man makes, even in combat. Gordon picked up his rifle and went out on the ledge. From the position of the stars, it was past midnight. He sat down on the ledge with his back against the cliff wall. He did not intend to sleep, but he slept in spite of himself, and woke suddenly to find himself on his feet with nerves tingling and his skin crawling with the sensation that grim peril had crept close upon him. He glimpsed a vague shadow fading into the black mouth of a cave not far away. He threw up his rifle, and the shot sent the echoes flying and ringing from cliff to cliff. He waited tensely, but neither saw nor heard anything else. After that, he sat with his rifle across his knees, every faculty alert. His position, he realized, was precarious, like a man marooned on a deserted island. He could venture out onto the plains and be hunted, or he could remain here in the caves with water, food, and shelter to afford him at least a fighting chance at survival. But here also was a present menace to him, in the caves themselves. A menace, he felt, was the solution to the riddle of Al-Wazir's fate. That menace he meant to drive to bay with the coming of daylight. He sat there until dawn turned the eastern sky rose and white. With the coming of the light, he strained his eyes into the desert, expecting to see a moving line of dots that would mean men on camels. But only the tawny, empty waste levels and ridges met his gaze. Not until the sun was rising did he enter the caves. The level beams struck into them, disclosing features that had been veiled in shadows the evening before. He went first to the passage where he had first heard the sinister footfalls, and there he found the explanation to one mystery. A series of hand and footholes, lightly niched in the stone of the wall, led up through a square hole in the rocky ceiling into the cave above. The jinn of the caves had been in that passage, and had escaped by that route, for some reason choosing flight rather than battle just then. Now that he was rested, he became aware of the bite of hunger and headed for the eagle's nest to get his breakfast out of the tins before he pursued his exploration of the caves. he entered the wide chamber, lighted by the early sun, which streamed through the door, and stopped dead. A bent figure in the door of the storeroom wheeled erect to face him. For an instant, they both stood frozen. Gordon saw a man confronting him like an image of the primordial, naked, gaunt, with a great matted tangle of hair and beard from which the eyes blazed wildly. It might have been a caveman out of the dawn centuries who stood there, a stone gripped in each brawny hand, but the high, broad forehead was not the slanting brow of a savage, nor was the face, almost covered though it was by the tangled beard. It was Al-Wazir, and the explanation of the mystery rushed upon him with all its sickening implications. Al-Wazir was a madman. As if goaded by the sound of his voice, the naked man started violently, cried out incoherently, and hurled the rock in his right hand. Gordon dodged, and it shattered on the wall behind him with an impact that warned him of the unnatural power lurking in the maniac's thews. Al-Wazir was taller than Gordon, with a magnificent, broad-shouldered, lean-hipped torso, ridged with muscles. Gordon half turned and set his rifle against the wall, and as he did so, Al-Wazir hurled the rock in his left hand and followed it across the cave with a bound, shrieking frightfully, foam flying from his lips. Gordon met him breast to breast, bracing his muscular legs against the impact, and Al-Wazir grunted explosively as he was stopped dead in his tracks. Gordon pinioned his arms at his side, and a wild shriek broke from the madman's lips as he tore and plunged like a trapped animal. His muscles were like quivering steel wires under Gordon's grasp that writhed and knotted. His teeth snapped beast-like at Gordon's throat, and as the American jerked back his head to escape them, Al-Wazir tore loose his right arm and whipped it over Gordon's left arm and down. Before the American could prevent it, he had grasped the scimitar hilt and torn the blade from its scabbard. Up and back went the long arm with the sheen of naked steel, and Gordon, sensing death in the lifted sword, smashed his left fist into the madman's jaw. It was a short, terrific hook that traveled little more than a foot, but it was like the jolt of a mule's kick. Al-Wazir's head snapped back between his shoulders under the impact, then fell limply forward on his breast. His legs gave way simultaneously, and Gordon caught him and eased him to the rocky floor. Presently, the eyes opened and gazed wildly around, flaring redly as they fixed on Gordon's face. The clawing hands, with their long black nails, came up and caught at Gordon's throat as the American drew back out of reach. Al-Wazir made a convulsive effort to rise, then sank back and crouched. With his unwinking stare, his fingers making aimless motions, Gordon looked at him somberly, sick at his soul. What a miserable, revolting end to dreams and philosophies. Al-Wazir had come into the desert seeking meditation and peace and the visions of the ancient prophets. He had found horror and insanity. Stick around after the credits for a brief word from some of our fellow indie podcasters, creators, and friends. There may even be some bloopers, outtakes, and bonus content as well. You have been listening to Octoberpod. Octoberpod is produced, edited, and directed by Edward October. The series co-producers are MJ McAdams and Amber Jordan. Logo and banner graphics by Jessica Good. Edward October character design by Nick Calavera. Select still photography courtesy of unsplash.com. Select music cues by Dr. Dreamchip and various other stock music and sound effects courtesy of freesound.org. Music from Bigfoot Apocalypse and Thorax, theme from Octoberpod, composed by Nico Vitesi. All other images, music, and FX cues, except where noted, are sourced from within the public domain. Follow us on YouTube at Octoberpod Home Video, on Instagram, and the app I still call Twitter at Octoberpod VHS, and on TikTok and Blue Sky at Octoberpod. Or find us and all of our links on the World Wide Web at octoberpodvhs.com. For business inquiries or story submissions, email octoberpod@gmail.com. If you enjoyed this program, we'd be very pleased if you told your friends about us. And while you're at it, write us a 5-star or equivalent review wherever you're listening. The man who spoke to you was Mr. Edward October.
Hola, amor.
Hola, cariño.
Y bienvenidos a Uy, qué horror, a Latinx horror movie podcast with Johnny
And Eileen. En este espeluznante podcast, we explore the often overlooked world of Latinx horror films. Cada semana, we watch and discuss horror films from different countries in Latin America,
or with a Latinx director.
or starring a Latinx lead.
Si es de horror y Latinx, we're watching it.
Nuevos episodios every Monday.
Listen to Uy, qué horror on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
They rule the streets. They take what they want.
Hand it over, street meats, before we make you dead meat.
And you'll have to deal with them if you want to make it through the night. If Ashley wants to survive, she'll need to fight on their turf. She'll have to fight dirty.
Stop struggling.
And she'll have to pick them off one by one if she hopes to make it through the night. Make It Through the Night, the savage novel of revenge and violence on the streets by Amy Cotto. Available now from Amazon.com. Find more by author Amy Cotto by visiting tvfanatic.blog or on Twitter at TV_fanatic_girl. Make It Through the Night by Amy Cotto. Her night from hell has only just begun.
I'm Maddie.
And I'm Amber. And we're Witches Talking Tarot.
And we're bringing you all things occult.
Every Tuesday and Thursday, twice a week for your magical pleasure.
Join us as we dive into aliens,
Cryptids, the Illuminati,
super in the natural.
Because that's the kind of witches we are. So join these high energy witches twice a week. Come sit a spell and see why we'll be your favorites.
Test, test, test.
Papa's gonna buy you a cosmic. That's cute. Hush, little baby, don't say a word. Papa's gonna buy you a cosmic gourd. That's funny.
Going back to literature, I was also obsessed with Greek mythology, and when I discovered the Minotaur, the famous Greek monster which had the head and tail of a bull and the body of a man, I kind of wanted to read every single horror story that involved the Minotaur because I was obsessed with that monster for some reason.
He was cooking or brewing. Brew crime, schnoogans, snoochie boochies, brew crime. Sorry. He lifted his head presently, shook it like a lion, shook it like a mop, shook it like a Polaroid picture. Silas, Recently, you conducted an interview with child actors of the horror movie Bloat.
I thought Bloat was a well-made found footage little film. I love that trend. I love the trend of expatriates living in other countries. Reminds me of Albert Camus' The Stranger. The idea of an outsider, the hostility towards the outsider, and the negativity towards the outsider, how it's easily accused. I love that vibe, not just in another country, but even someone moving into, let's say, an apartment complex or, a neighborhood. Think The Tenant or Rosemary's Baby, where it's always, like the freak or this person is turned into a weirdo, even though if they're not a weirdo, they're just a normal person. I love that. I just love that vibe. And I love the idea of the eeriness and the loneliness and the susceptibility to be hurt in a hostile environment or in a distant environment. I think I might have inadvertently exposed a few more of my fears along the way, so it wasn't just what I mentioned in the beginning. Ha ha ha.
That would explain the lack of any blood stains. Abruptly he swore, "Damn, I must be going batty. Damn, I must be going batty." Oh dear. It was a fact. Damn, I must be going batty. It was a fact. The old timer behind the counter, a guy named Judd, because of course his name was.
What truly scares you? Okay, I've seen ghosts, I've heard stories about the jinn, been to haunted places. Of course, not intentionally. I don't go to haunted places intentionally. Sometimes I went to places and then discovered they were haunted, blah, 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 stuff like that. I went to cemeteries, on my own, cemeteries where I didn't bury anyone. So it wasn't like a burial or something. I just entered the cemetery, and I find particular cemeteries to be very peaceful, very quiet, not really scary places. Usually Christian cemeteries, but Muslim cemeteries I've never been to on my own. I don't think they're that well inhabited. So yeah, those places are scary and spooky, and I think you should avoid doing, like summoning ghosts and seances and stuff like that. But things that scare me really, really most is not the supernatural. It's humans. Nothing scarier than a human being. People have a capacity for evil and a capacity for cruelty and for being seriously mean and terrible with each other. So I've seen how dark people can get and how a good person under pressure and duress and shitty circumstances can turn literally into a monster. And I don't use this term lightly. I've seen, some terrible events get the best of people, the best of good, upstanding citizens, good Samaritans, and still what life did to them turned them into 180-degree different personalities than they were. So yeah, humans scare me, and their capacity for evilness, if you may say, their capacity for hurting even sometimes the people they love the most, is just something that truly scares me. In your opinion, what are the elements of a great horror story? Can you give us an example?
There was another mystery. Why had his pursuers not reached the caves? One or both of them. The desert was a breeding place of mysteries, a twilight realm of fantasy. Had the fabled jinn of the empty abode snatched up Al-Wazir and flown away to... fuck that. Son of a fucking... Gripping that tire arm. I want to take you to a place... Whoa.
You told me once that you or someone you know has encountered a jinn. I didn't know this guy. Before you...
Maybe we get a bum 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 bum. Restart. One can see, even at a great distance, that the sheer rock walls rising from a stony backbone... God damn.
Okay. Now tell me your jinn story. No, try to tell the story as though they're telling a ghost story around the campfire. Well.
RobCan167 posted this story. At some point in my early teenage years, 13-ish, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and see a black figure standing at the foot of my bed. However, I knew it was a woman, even though I'd never seen her face. She would appear about once every couple months. The first few times, it petrified me. I'd sit up most of the night staring at her. Eventually, I got used to her. Depending on how tired I was, I'd either go back to bed, tell her to go to what. Depending on how tired I was, I'd either go back to bed, tell her to go away, or try to speak to her. Whenever I spoke to her, she would never respond. Occasionally, she'd appear standing over me in bed. That was the most scary. Later, a friend of mine, who's a qualified psychologist, told me that there are various stress-related illnesses that can manifest themselves like this. My childhood was very stressful for different reasons, so I assumed this was it. The last 2 times I saw her was when I was about 25 years old, and again 7 years later on my honeymoon, when my wife woke me up petrified that there was a woman in black standing at the foot of our bed. I stared at the woman in black, then at my wife. I was shocked that my wife could see her too. I got up to turn the light on, and she was gone. I didn't want to scare my wife, so I told her that I hadn't seen anything. I've never told my wife this story because it would just scare her, and I don't think I ever will. I do ask her from time to time if she ever saw her again, and she hasn't. She tells me this as one of her jinn stories. She tells this as one of her own jinn stories, and I just sit there and listen with a smile on my face. But deep down, I hope that this woman in black will never come back again. I mean, I'm a popular motherfucker right now. And I might, because of her answer, I might switch this question with, what are you working on now? The maniac's thews. I need to look up a word. What is a thew? Have you? Thew. Okay. She would force me to wear it.
Your poetry and prose speak of real-life horrors. Let's talk about some of these themes and what you achieve by sharing them with a world that needs to be aware of those themes. I'm beginning to lose my faith in art as a power of change. Unfortunately, my friend, I don't know. I feel like I've written enough and done enough, and I feel like now I don't really write poetry and prose to change the world or to talk about real life horrifying themes. I'm not even sure what my next poetry project will be. I'm not really sure. All I know is I write because sometimes I just can't not write. And I love writing about particular things that matter to me, things that make me feel. And in the past, of course, up until probably last year, I used my writings to be able to connect with like-minded people. But I don't do that any longer. I don't do that anymore, because I don't want to connect with people. I've connected with people already, and if people want to connect with me via my writing, they're welcome, but I don't do it consciously. Not anymore, no.
Gordon had come looking for a hermit philosopher, radiant with mellow wisdom. He had found a filthy, naked lunatic. Fiend. And that's the end. Thanks for having me, guys.